All right, hello and welcome to Theology on Tap. Today I want to talk about salvation. Can you lose salvation? You know, in the many years that I've been a Christian, especially when I was going to Bible college and seminary and things like that, getting involved with church, some of the questions that is asked quite often actually is that can you lose salvation? Now, it's not an easy yes or no answer, but obviously. But because it really depends on what you mean by salvation, what do you mean by lost. But I would guess majority of people that ask the question, it's like, can you lose salvation? You have faith in Jesus Christ and you're going to go to heaven. You're going to go there and live a blissful life forever and ever. If you don't believe in Jesus Christ, you're going to go to hell. That's the perspective, I guess. So once you believe in Jesus Christ, can you lose your faith? So thus lose your salvation. So you had a ticket to heaven, but then later on you lost that ticket and now you're going to go to hell. So basically that's the question. Now, once again, the answer is not as simple as yes or no, but especially coming from me, because I'm not a law-oriented person. I'm a Jesus person. I'm a free-thinking, Jesus-loving kind of a person. I want to bring glory to Jesus. And I'm not a law person in the sense that what Paul said, the law was useful to make people frustrated with their life so they could find another way. So once you find Christ, then that law that made you frustrated becomes obsolete because you don't need that anymore because you have Christ. And with Christ, like I said in the last couple of videos, we have the Spirit of Jesus within us. So we live by the Spirit. And that way of thinking changes everything. Because if you go by the law, the way that I was taught growing up in the church, basically, is you got to live up to his standard, right? I think even a pastor from, what's that big church down in Orange County? I forgot the name of it now. But even he says something like, well, when you have Christ, when you believe in Jesus, you become part of his family, and so you're adopted into his family. However, if you don't follow by the father's rules within the family, then you get kicked out. So I guess he believes that you can lose salvation. But my question has always been more like, well, even if you kick your son out, doesn't mean he's no longer your son anymore, right? You're still part of the family once you're in the family. So I don't know how you could lose that, I guess, blood relationship, whether you are pleased with your kids or not. They're still your kids, that's what I would think. But once again, I come from a totally different perspective where we focus on the Spirit of God that dwells in us. The Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, this powerful Spirit dwells in us, and he will guide us and enable us and walk with us in our path of righteousness to do what is right. All right. And I think people say that sounds too easy because then you could go ahead and sin as much as you want. But I don't know if that's the case. Following the Spirit, a lot of times is a lot more difficult because at least with the written law, you know exactly what not to do. But with the Spirit, you have to live by faith, right? And sometimes, you don't know. Sometimes you just have to have faith. All right. But I want to go over to Ephesians chapter 1 and listen to this. It says, in him, you also, after listening to the message of truth, the gospel of your salvation, having also believed, you were sealed in him with the Spirit of promise. The Spirit of promise. Now, we were sealed with the Spirit, the Jesus Spirit, the Comforter, right? And he's a Spirit of promise. Well, what is that promise? So we don't really rely on my ability to be able to live up to his standard. I don't rely on my ability to follow the rules and regulations. I rely on the Spirit and his promises. All right. It is changing of your mentality, the way you think. That's why, Paul said in Romans, you got to transform by renewing your mind. You have to start thinking not so much about what you do, but who you belong to. And the Spirit that dwells in us, and it's the Spirit of promise. Well, what is the promise? It says in verse 14, Ephesians chapter 1, Spirit of promise, who is given as a pledge of our inheritance. Pledge of our inheritance. Well, what does that mean by pledge? Well, if you look it up in Greek lexicon, all right, I want to read you the definition, right? The pledge. It means an earnest, a money which in purchases is given as a pledge or down payment that the full amount will subsequently be paid. All right. So the way I remember going over this word in seminary, and I asked the preacher, the teacher, the professor, I said, well, does that mean it's kind of like buying a house, right? You borrow money from the bank, but normally they would ask for somewhere between 5 to 20% down payment. So you get to move into the house and enjoy everything, but you still have to make payments in a monthly basis to the bank because they still own the house, right? Until 30 years later or so, then it becomes totally yours. Right? So it's kind of like that. It's the Spirit of promise who is given to us as a pledge, meaning He, God, the Spirit, made the down payment. So we are saved. We belong to God's family. But until we're with Him face to face, we have to live a certain life, a life that brings glory to Him. And so how can we be sure that we're able to continue to believe Him and do the right thing? Because, like I said, many people believe you can lose salvation, that if you don't follow the Spirit or if you don't live up to God's standard, you could lose that salvation, right? But the Spirit is given us as a down payment. At the same time, right, He makes the payments, the monthly payments. He continues to do so until we see Him face to face, where then will be full salvation. Right? That's Paul's theology. You know, he says, until the time we're fully saved, we will run the race to win. Well, how do we know we're going to win? Well, because the Spirit of God that is given to us a down payment, who makes the monthly payment to make sure that we stay in the house. He makes the payment. Right? So it's really up to Him, to Jesus Christ. All right. So once again, in verse 14, the Spirit is given as a pledge of our inheritance. It's guaranteed, that is, with a view to the redemption of God's own possession. We belong to Him because He paid the price. He continues to make the price. So to me, I don't even think the question of can you lose salvation shouldn't even come into to the table, because it's done. Jesus did it, and He will continue to do it. The Spirit is a guarantee, all right, and we follow that Spirit. Right? I remember a few years back, I had a conversation with a neighbor who happens to be a pastor of a denomination. I forgot which denomination, but you know, he moved in our neighborhood, and he was excited to know that I was Christian. And then we went to have breakfast, and this subject came up, that he was adamant about losing salvation. You have to live in a certain standard, or you can lose salvation. And I kind of disagree with him. And we were going back and forth. Not that it really matters, right? You know, he could believe what he wants, right? Because sooner or later, we're all going to end up in one same place anyways. That is Jesus Christ. When heavens and earth will come together in Him. I'm a firm believer of that. Anyway, so I reminded him about a little story that's in Corinthians, I believe. When Paul is talking to, writing a letter to a church, a gathering, and they say, well, there happens to be a person there who is a Christian, who confessed Christ, but have decided to have a sexual relationship with his stepmother. I think it was a stepmother. Right? And everybody knows that, you know, that's not right. In today's standards, I don't know. But until these days, you would say that's a big no-no. Right? And Paul's answer was this. He said, well, you know, don't associate with him anymore. You know, if he's not going to change, one person went to him to talk and he won't change. 2 people went up to talk to him and he won't change. A group as a church went to talk to him, he won't change. And you say, well, I'm not going to, you know, just kind of disassociate with that person. in the same way of saying forgive them. You know, forgive means to divorce, right? Divorce yourself from that. All right, so separate yourself from that person, not to condemn him or anything, just cut off the relationship, right? So then Paul says this, he says, well, hand him over to Satan. Let him live that satanic life, you know, demonic life, meaning miserable life, right? Perishing life, something that he might be having a good time at this time, but which will lead to something miserable. Let him live into that life so that at least his soul will be saved. Right? So it's kind of like him saying, let him live that life and let him become miserable, so sooner or later he'll return. Like he was assured of that because he had this understanding of the Spirit of God who is our down payment, who is our pledge, and he continues to make that payment, is a guarantee of our inheritance, guaranteed. You know? So there is that sense of fear that is taken out, right? But more of a relationship with God with love. We're his child, we are his children, and we want to do what is right, because if we know that our Father, you know, was good, that he doesn't mean to manipulate us to do something for him or become abusive because he's upset about something. Let's say our Father is good, then of course we want to do what is right by him. Right? And we have a Spirit that guarantees that. And the power of the Spirit that enables us to stay in the path of righteousness. So I guess what I'm trying to say is yield to the Spirit of God. Get rid of the mindset that says, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. There is a good and bad, and there is good and evil. We gotta do good. We gotta get rid of evil. That way of looking at sin actually will cause us to sin even more. Right? That's what happens. That's what Paul seemed to say that naturally happens. So we gotta follow the Spirit of God. I pray that as you have the Spirit within you, to know that he was given to us as a pledge. He's a down payment, and he makes the monthly payment. Our inheritance is guaranteed. The blessing is going to be there, and he will lead us in the path of righteousness. Go with the Spirit of Jesus Christ. All right. God bless you, and I'll see you next time.